Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
I've got to change that song, everybody. I don't necessarily mean that I've got to change the song, but I've got to change that voiceover with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Because as listeners will by now know, last week's episode was Tim Flower's final episode as co-host of the DEX Show. And recording this one actually just after our trip to Lisbon. I'd never been to Lisbon before, but what a beautiful place. We were there for the Next Think kickoff, which, by the way, for the DEX Show is often, and I think the DEX industry at large, although it may not always know it, is where the year truly begins. So 2026 in DEX is now officially begun, and had a wonderful trip to Lisbon. Hopefully you all enjoyed that episode that came out last week. If you haven't listened to it yet, do tune in. It was moving for us involved. I think it was moving for the audience, and it was also a lot of fun. And a lot of people talking to me out in Lisbon about what this show is going to do next. And I keep saying we're going to be making some announcements very soon, and we are. Things are really coming into view. Look, we take it. Tim leaving as a challenge to the show. You know, we know what a amazing co-host Tim's been for the last 5 years and how valued his voice is by the listenership. So we know we've got to up our game, and we are intent on doing so. We're very excited about what we've got planned for 2026. People will be hearing more about that soon, as well as some change to the opening show music. You know, there's much to do now. We've been able to say goodbye to Tim properly. It's time to move on into the future. And with that, I'm hugely excited to welcome back a returning guest to today's show. He's Anthony Firmin, an AI and digital transformation leader, previously a 12-year veteran as an IT leader at EY. I have that right, don't I, Anthony? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
What have you been up to? How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Good to see you again, Tom. Thanks for having me back. And I have to say that I'd be lying if I didn't say that there's a little bit of me that's a little disappointed to have missed Tim's last show by one episode. So I wish I've been all the best. What have I been up to? So, as you know, over the last couple of years, I've been operating really at the intersection of AI and experience management, which is really, what makes people trust these tools, come back to them, and actually change how they work. And a lot of the focus has been taking, I guess, human signals, what people find confusing, frustrating, or genuinely helpful, and essentially closing the loop so that the technology keeps getting better. Because as you'll know, AI only sticks when it makes work feel kind of simpler, not just different. And last year, I got to deliver this for a very large professional services firm using Gen AI, sorry, and agentic AI to tackle what was a really very real problem of internal knowledge fragmentation, right? And turning it into something that people could rely on day to day. Um, and I think what became really clear to me is that AI needs a kind of persistent enablement capability around it. And I have to say, my experience probably over the last year says that adoption implies a kind of one-off event, and I think with AI, it's quite different. You need this persistent enablement capability around it, right? And I think in practice, that boils down to an operate model that kind of keeps the portfolio focused on the journeys that matter most. It that proves value safely, that builds repeatable foundations, and then really scales what works and continually improves outcomes. So over the last few months, I've been kind of designing and stress testing what that capability needs to look like in the real world. So in short, it's been a busy but fantastic year.
I didn't realize you'd had the hands-on experience of actually executing it. Actually, I'd be honest, I've just been following your articles on LinkedIn, and I thought these are great takes specifically on AI and adoption. So the fact that they're stress tested, they're not just takes, and
Their battle scars are there.
Excellent. Well, look, give us your informed, scarred overview of the good, the bad, and the ugly as it pertains to AI transformation in the industry more broadly at the moment.
Okay, so where are we? I think as a nation, we're kind of in a messy middle. It's a difficult one to position because obviously maturity varies so much across organizations. But um, let's surmise at the messy middle. I think the good is, there are genuine pockets of AI value, right? Especially in knowledge work, in drafting, and in support, where AI is really well integrated. I think there's a lot of AI that's still kind of bolted on, so employees get the same work, but more Windows effect. And I think the ugly is really the experience debt. So fragmented tools, unclear guardrails, low trust driving workarounds and AI. And I think there's probably one more thing I'd add because it sits underneath all of that, and that's I think I alluded to earlier, but I think too many organizations treat AI as kind of one and done, build, deploy, move on, um, and in reality, it behaves like a living system, right? Quality drifts, context changes, and trust is fragile, right? So you need this continuous improvement loop that sort of keeps tuning quality, workflow fit, and that sort of day-to-day experience.
And when you think about AI in the digital workplace specifically, how do you define what it is and what that distinction means for those leaders responsible for driving adoption and
Yeah.
transformation?
Oh, such a good question. How do you define AI? I guess I think of it as a kind of capability layer across tools and workflows. Um, and because the latest Gen AI is probabilistic, I hate having to say that word. Um, you're essentially managing trust and quality, not just kind of uptime. So leaders aren't just deploying software; they're changing how work gets done,
Mhm.
and they're setting new norms around judgment, risk, and accountability. So practically, that means you need clear guardrails, you need quality management, and this, as I say, this persistent enablement capability that gives you measurement, feedback loops, and operational ownership, right? So that system keeps improvement. Otherwise, I think the risk is you kind of get this burst of curiosity at the beginning, and then sort of drop off when people hit those first few kind of "I can't trust this" moments.
Yeah, we'll come back to trust in a minute. I think you've written very interestingly about that part of the overall picture. But to just harken back to something else a phrase you've already used here and you use in some of your writing, which is same work, more windows. Um, First of all, this is a kind of an anecdotal kind of perception to a degree, right? But why do anecdotal reports matter so much in this area? And how would you characterize that general experience of AI in the workplace so far?
Okay. I think, yeah, anecdotes are important because, they're that sort of earlier signal that AI is increasing cognitive load, right? Instead of
Mhm.
yeah, and those anecdotes kinda they often point to, context switching, duplication, kind of unclear happy paths, if you like, and, leaders can see licenses and usage, but employees, they can tell you, um, when the reality is, I'm doing the same job, or um, it's the same, but just with more tabs or more copy and paste and more checking and validating, right? And that's usually the sign, or probably the first sign that you're building experience debt. And so, I guess if I characterize the workplace AI experience so far, I think it's really promising, but it's uneven. In pockets, it's brilliant. I think for a lot of people, it's still sort of assistive, but adjacent. You ask the AI, and then you validate it, and then you rework it, and then you sort of copy and paste it into the system that you're actually working in, and that sort of results in this new time tax, if you like, right? That context switching, that duplication, uncertainty around what's safe and inconsistent quality. Um, so I think the response or the move is to treat them as hypotheses, right? So map the task, find the friction points, then design the workflow so that AI is integrated. It's not just another tab or another tool. And when you do that and you sort of keep tuning based on experience and usage signals, then, I think the anecdotes change. People stop saying more windows and they start saying, yeah, this genuinely saves me time and effort.
We're biased because we're the DEX show, right, Anthony? But we do we do see DEX as a particularly timely area of IT. Its time is now, shall we say? And AI only increases that relevancy. And I think you've kind of spelled out to a degree why that might be. Do you see DEX as becoming more significant in this era with its ability to mention human perception, being almost a human in the loop or identifying them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the short is I do. I think perception becomes this sort of central metric because you know with AI, the deciding factor is really can it do it, right? It can. The deciding factor is do I trust it, and does it reduce the effort for me day to day? And people's confidence and clarity around what's safe and whether AI feels like it's helping or adding cognitive load, they are they're essentially leading indicators of whether adoption will stick. So if perception's negative, you'll often see drop off long before you see a problem in the project plan. And that's for me where it intersects with DEX, right? DEX gives you the operational context around those perceptions. So, what's happening in the digital environment when people try to use AI. So if sentiment says, this is slowing me down or I don't trust it, then telemetry signals can really help pinpoint the why, right? Is it reliability issues? Is it latency? Is it tool hopping, context switching? Is it, I don't know, spikes in escalations, self-service is broken? In other words, I guess I'd surmise and say perception tells you that there's smoke. And I think DEX helps you find where the fire is.
Oh, that's cool. And mentioned it again there, but let's drill into the question of trust and the degree to which trust or the lack of it shows up in that user experience of AI and what makes it such a critical factor in adoption. And I would add to this question, Anthony, what can be done to increase trust, to shore it up, to support people in these areas where there's that detrimental insecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a more fundamental question when it comes to AI adoption. So, if there's one thing that makes or breaks AI uptake, it's trust, right? People grumble their way through, a slow or awkward system. We've all done it, but they won't hand over judgment to something they don't believe in. And what's tricky, I think, is that organizations are really trying to clear several trust hurdles at the same time, whether they know it or not. One is, trust in the technology itself. So, is it dependable enough? Is it giving me accurate answers? Does it fail in ways that are understandable rather than surprising? And another is trust in the employer. Is data and usage being used to improve support and service, right? Or is it there to sort of monitor, score, and judge people? And then there's trust in the individual, right? Do I know when it's safe to use this, right? How to check it, how not to get caught out, by putting something in there that should not go in there. Um, and then there's this fourth layer that often sits in the background, right? Which I'd kind of label self-protection. I think a lot of employees quietly assume, maybe not so quietly in some cases, but they assume that once AI is proven and embedded, it becomes an argument for reducing roles, for moving work to lower cost locations, et cetera, et cetera. And in that context, sort of hesitating or failing to adopt isn't stubbornness, right? It's a rational response to a perceived threat. So what do you do about it? I think from a leadership perspective, building trust it's bigger than publishing guidance, right? It's you need kind of a clear set of guardrails. You need quality standards. You need a sort of easy way to escalate or verify. But I think leaders also need to be really explicit about their intent, right? So how will any efficiency be reinvested? Is it in better service and innovation and learning? Is it redeploying people, right? And then don't just say it. You then have to sort of prove it through consistent decisions and behaviors. And I think that's when, when confidence grows and adoption can become self-sustaining.
You mentioned your on the ground experience there, and I'd be fascinated to know how you addressed particularly the latter point in that adoption process you've worked on IRL, because it's easy to say to employers, well, you need to chart out where the reinvestment's going to happen, where the career development is going to happen. But are we sure about the answers to those questions collectively as yet? This seems like something we need to be articulating together a bit more than we currently are. What does the next generation of what do the next generation of technology jobs look like, for instance, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it's I'm not sure that anyone is doing that incredibly well. In fact,
Yeah. I'm aware of that at the moment. It's something I've noticed, yeah.
it's the big question everyone's trying to work out. I mean, my hope is that what AI does to us in this phase of AI is in the sort of augmentation phase is that it enables organizations to move employees up the value curve, right? So this isn't about investing to reduce headcount. It's about how do we actually make work more human, get people focused on tasks that generate more valuable, that are more rewarding to those individuals, and get rid of the dross and that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Um, so I don't have a solid answer for you. I think
Sure. Yeah.
a lot of organizations are working out. It also depends ultimately on what leadership are really seeking out of their AI truly. And I'm not even sure that organizations as yet are even clear on what they want from AI. They just know that they need to invest in it because they want to fall behind the curve, right? And lose out to competitors. So there are some really, really big questions that are very much unanswered in a lot of organizations.
The trust element, it brings to mind a sort of ambiguous area of adoption, which I felt was highlighted in the amusing stories around the M dash last year, right? People being able to eliminate the M dash from their work so that they would occlude the participation of AI in it. And it might be as simple as you put a piece of written work in and you say, "Oh, give it a quick edit for spelling or something," and grammar and spelling check, and outcomes. They change the dashes. I mean, suddenly you think, and I was one of these people, suddenly everyone thinks your work is completely AI generated. But it points to a kind of paradox that people who are using AI often feel like compelled to hide that they're using it, as if it devalues their own production, as if it devalues their own contribution, which I think, in a different way to not using AI, points to that same sense of oh, if I seem too dependent on it, or if it seems too powerful, it will make me that much more expendable in the eyes of my employer or my colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And this sort of touches on why, my operating at the intersect of AI and experience management is so key, because AI it's a human challenge and not a technology challenge. And you just touched on one tiny aspect of it. It's about us as humans and our unique and strange behaviors.
Neuroses. AI is not as neurotic as us, that's for sure. Yeah. So let's look at ROI. It's an interesting area, right? And it's something that we saw a lot about in Lisbon. Spoiler alert. But how should organizations be thinking about measurement and visibility more broadly? What does meaningful ROI or meaningful demonstrable ROI from AI look like in real terms, in your view?
Right. Okay. Um, it's probably quite a big answer to this question.
John, take your time.
So I guess quantitatively, I think most organizations are measuring what's easiest and most available, and this kind of also takes me back to experience management around kind of traditional tools, if you like. Things like licenses assigned and logins and prompt volume and feature clicks. Basically activity. Um, some are also tracking kind of model-centric metrics like latency or offline quality scores, and that's useful, right? But it doesn't tell you whether performance is improving. So what we're I think I think what we're not measuring well is the unit that really matters, which is task and journey impact, right? Things like end-to-end time to complete, first time right quality, rework, escalations to humans, right? And also the hidden AI attacks that I mentioned earlier of verification and copying outputs between systems. Because if you don't kind of capture and measure the rework and validation layer, then kind of AI can look kind of healthy on usage, but value stays flat, right? Um, so you're measuring the upside, but not the downside of AI at least. Um, so when so I guess when we say that the measurable contribution to performance lags the level of investment, I usually see three drivers, Tom. First is that there's there's basically there's no baseline, so people kick off their AI projects and programs. They didn't actually measure before AI, if you like,
Sure.
or they can't prove after. The second is, for me, the wrong level of measurement. Like they sort of measure the tool, but value doesn't live in the tool. It lives across the journey, right? And thirdly, attribution. So AI is spread across many surfaces. So unless you instrument, the workflow end to end, impact gets lost. And for me, there's this fourth driver that's underappreciated. And that is even when you do create real productivity gains, like converting them into clean financial numbers is often hard, right? So on my last program, we saved a huge amount of SME time because the digital assistant deflected huge volumes of queries away from them. But their SME responsibilities sat on top of their day job, right? So the benefit didn't show up as hard financial savings, right? It reduced a fractional slice of workload, it freed capacity, it improved responsiveness, all of which is super valuable. But it kind of boils down to release. Sorry. So the ROI question becomes, how do we turn that release capacity into measurable financial value, which isn't always easy. Um, I think in terms of obviously leaders ultimately want the financial story. And I think the way to get a credible one is to start with the operational levers that AI can actually move, right? Time, quality, risk, employee effort. I think if AI reduces cycle time, it cuts rework, it lowers escalations, and it makes work, feel simpler, then kind of the money follows after. Um, so where for me, where ROI usually lands is in a handful of places, right? Capacity release, as we just discussed. I think cost avoided, so fewer tickets, fewer escalations, less dependency on scarce experts. Um, Risk and loss reduction, so fewer errors and remediation, and sometimes service or revenue uplift when sort of responsiveness and quality improves. And, some organizations do get to hard cost out, contractor reductions or headcount. But I think that only really happens when the gains are really concentrated and they redesign roles and processes. Otherwise, I think the sort of first wave of AI is usually focused around capacity and avoidance. Um, so I guess wrapping it up, it's got a long-winded answer, but the key question for me isn't, are people using AI? It's, is the work measurably better? Have we decided, how we'll convert that improvement into value? And that's where, experience data really matters because it tells you whether AI is genuinely removing friction, or if it's just, shifting effort into checking, rework, and extra steps.
And does that align with another concept in your writing between the shallow and deep AI usage? As in, is that what aligns there with in terms of shallow usage, which is just usage, and deep usage, which is valuable usage?
I wouldn't. I'm not sure I'd phrase it exactly like that. I guess for me, um, so let's do an example. Let's think about IT support. So in IT support, I think of shallow versus deep AI as assist versus transform.
Sure.
So shallow AI kind of makes the existing process faster. It sort of summarizes a ticket, drafts a response, points you to the right knowledge. Useful, but the workflow is basically the same. Deep AI for me kind of changes or transforms the flow. So it starts to remove steps and handoffs away from humans, right? It classifies and routes incidents. It I don't know, it pulls the right diagnostics automatically, maybe proposes a resolution path with sources. And in, really tightly governed cases, it can trigger, an improved automation with, a human checkpoint. I think on the employee side, deep AI can genuinely deflect tickets by guiding self-service, verifying the fix, escalating, only when the journey is truly blocked. Um, and I guess the important thing is what that means for leadership. For me, the leadership difference is huge. Shallow AI, it kind of, I'm simplifying, but it mostly needs kind of onboarding and norms. Deep AI needs an operating model, needs clear guardrails, it needs ownership, it needs auditability, it needs quality controls, right? Because you're essentially delegating parts of judgment and action, not just speeding up writing. So, and I think, through a DEX lens, as you go deeper, I think you need visibility into where journeys break, right? So retries, escalations, tool hopping, right? So that you can tune the workflow and guardrails and not just push adoption comms.
Very cool. Yeah, I like that distinction a lot, particularly as it hits IT, right? Like,
Sure.
there's just the superficial of a deep internal transformation of this department among so many others. Um, Looking at AI journeys and agendas, coming back to your real world experience here, can you give an example of an organization doing AI adoption well and what this looked like in practice as opposed to in theory?
Sure. So I guess real world example without naming the organization is client confidential. They can't speak. Confidentiality matters. But I think the patterns are widely applicable. So I led an enterprise knowledge discovery program inside this global consulting environment where, the core journey was simple, right? Is I need a reliable answer fast from the organization's global knowledge. Um, and the underlying problem wasn't the model, it was fragmentation. Knowledge and guidance lived across dozens of systems and tools. So the employee experience was essentially search, ask around, wait a while for an answer and then hope that you've kind of found the latest and greatest correct version of the truth. Um, and what I think what worked really well was treating it as a journey, not a feature. So, we defined what good meant for that journey for different user archetypes. We put foundations in place, taxonomy, single source of truth, governance, clear operational ownership. Um, Critically, we were relentless around accuracy. And because going back to that trust issue, the last thing you want is, you know, you switch the tool on to users, they go and use it, and the first answer they get is evidently very, very wrong, right? So absolutely relentless around answer accuracy with before going out to a broad user base. Um, and we designed around real user patterns, right? Gathered through voice of employee and interviews. And then we essentially ran a super tight improvement loop. So ongoing quality evaluation, feedback capture, and managed backlog so that essentially the service kept getting better and better after go live. That continuous improvement loop. Um, and throughout, we going back to human centered, right? We applied this human centered lens. When we were designing and testing, we did so with policy SMEs, with employees, and I think what worked really well from the sort of user based perspective is that we included both skeptics and sort of keen innovators, if you like. So you had both ends of the adoption curve. Um, and we balanced speed and risk and secured, key learnings, including change in adoption learnings through controlled expansion. So alpha, small user base, beta, much bigger user base, through to a full country rollout, and then into global rollout. So, success wasn't measured as usage alone. We looked for repeat usage, shift in the tone of user anecdotes, measurable reduction in query volumes to SMEs, amongst other things. And in other words, whether it was genuinely removing effort or not but essentially to determine whether it was genuinely removing effort and making work feel simpler for the end user. Um, So I guess summarizing the playbook, we pick one or two journeys, right, with obvious pain, map that current state, align on what the target experience needs to be, fix knowledge and trust foundations, instrument experience and outcomes, and then keep tuning quality and workflow fit as an ongoing capability. And that's what really turned this AI into a dependable way of working rather than kind of string of pilots, if you like.
100%. And this is a personal curiosity of mine, right? With regards to AI overuse is usually framed in terms of, I guess it's a risk issue, an incautious kind of usage is what your mind usually goes to. But is there any perception, or should there be, about the danger of overuse in terms of quality of work, cognitive load, even dependency, although that gets perhaps a bit more niche? Um, I suppose my personal view, Anthony, is that there's always a slight threat that with AI transformation, there's always a threat of mediocrity in the way in work. And is that something that you feel that like corporate leadership is aware of or should be aware of? And is there anything that can be done about that from an adoption perspective?
Yeah, that's a super super interesting question. I tell you why it's interesting, because I don't think it's very much on the I don't think it's on the minds of leaders.
Mm.
I think everyone, I mean, everyone is generalization, but I think most organizations are they're so focused on how on earth do we make this AI investment successful? How do we get people using it? How do we drive that adoption? But actually, the question you just asked is kind of what falls out of the back end once you're successful.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations aren't that mature yet.
Mm.
So let me give you my perspective. I think that the simple answer is, yeah, I think there is a case for monitoring AI overuse, but only if you're like crystal clear about what you're monitoring for, and you do it in a way that protects trust rather than eroding it. That won't surprise you, given the earlier points that I made around trust. So, you know, overuse, I guess, what does overuse manifest itself as? I think it's not just, oh, people are using AI a lot, right? I think overuse is when usage starts to create this sort of downside risk, right? So I guess three obvious things off the top of my head. First is quality drift, right? People kind of accept low quality outputs, right? Critical thinking from a human perspective drops, and therefore errors and rework rises. Secondly, maybe hidden workload, right? This point I made earlier around this sort of AI time tax. If that time tax is quietly expanding in the background, and people, you're not getting the efficiency out of that AI, sorry, because people are essentially, you know, going through 20 prompts to get an answer, and then they're checking it, and they're not quite believing it, and they're validating it, and they're fixing it, and they're going back and do it again, and then they're copying and pasting it into the system that they're actually using. That could, I guess, become a downside risk. And then the last one is dependencies. So it was super interesting one for, from a human perspective, is people just, you know, the gray matter starts fading. And that's people lose the capability, or stop learning the underlying skill. So I guess those are super real. But I would say, if you are gonna go down that monitoring route, it has to be handled super carefully, right? If it feels like surveillance to your employees, to your end users, trust will collapse, and people will just work around it. Um, I think the healthy approach is to essentially define what good looks like by role and by task, and then, monitor at the journey level. Where is effort rising? Where are people bouncing between tools? Where self-service fails and escalation spike, rather than sort of policing individuals. But there's a really interesting angle that I discovered in my last program, and that is safeguarding, right?
Yes.
So we found that some people, maybe all people, will disclose distress more readily to an AI assistant than to a colleague. And, that creates this really significant duty of care when you're designing your AI. So you take it to the extreme. What if an employee tells the bot, that they're having suicidal thoughts. You need the assistant to respond appropriately, both in terms of the content, but also the tone of voice, and you need clear, pre-agreed trigger conditions for when a trained human is alerted. And you need to be really, really thoughtful and specific as to who that human is. For example, if in that example, I don't think it should be the manager that's
Head of HR.
right. It should be a well-being responder, someone who's trained in these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I digress a little, but it's it's important, and it's it's a key aspect of that monitoring.
Sure.
Perhaps a few people really think about. So I guess to wrap that point up around monitoring, yep, definitely a case for it. I think the key is design transparently, explain what is and isn't monitored, protect privacy, and make sure that escalation routes are safe, proportionate, and governed.
I think you've touched upon so many interesting things in this conversation, Anthony, and you helped us help the post-Tim era on the DEX Show go off with a bang. Really, really appreciate it. Great to have you back on, and let people know where they can reach out to you, and read your very interesting articles as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, feel free to contact me via LinkedIn. That's probably the best route. But thank you for inviting me back. I always love these conversations. Super.
Likewise. Thanks so much.
Take care of yourself. Thanks, Tom.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.